All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Royalty and Romance. The last few weeks, we've spent time looking through the different texts that talked about Tamar and Yehudah and their relationship. We spent time trying to understand a little bit more about the relationship between Ruth and Boaz. And last week, we went through the very controversial topic of David and Batsheva. Now, there's a theme here, and the theme is that we're talking about the Davidic line, which ultimately relates to Mashiach, to the Messiah. Now this is important because as Jews we say, we're waiting for Mashiach longingly, we want this time of a Messianic age, and so on and so forth. And the question that we're trying to answer is, why does the Messianic line have to come from such a controversial, background, with these men and women making such interesting choices about their partners and so on and so forth. But I think it's important to take a step back for a minute. We've spent a lot of time talking about everything from David's side of the family, from his father's side of the family, but let's double click a little bit and speak a little about his mother, right, or his great grandmother Ruth and where she comes from. We know that Ruth is a direct descendant of Ammon, and we know that Ammon is the daughter of Lot. So what I want to do with you today is I want to go through that story again. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I'm going to try to show you the story with different lenses. I want to give you the opportunity of understanding somewhat of a bigger theme that is buried in this story of Lot and his daughters and Sodom in general, and hopefully it'll shed light as we try to understand this unique aspect of our history. Maybe we'll walk away with some depth and some clarity, and hopefully in some inspiration. So let's start at the beginning. We know that Terach was Abraham's father, okay? And Abraham had 3 children. He had Nahor and Haran. And Haran holid et Lot. And Haran was the father of Lot. Now, what else do we know about Haran? What else do we know about this person, Haran, Abraham's brother? So, he died young, and that's exactly what it tells us. It says right there, look at the next verse. The first verse, 27, says that these are the family line. Number 28, Haran died in the lifetime of his father, Terach, in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Okay, so Abraham and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and that of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran. The father of Milcah and Iscah. Okay. Now, Sarai was barren and she had no children. Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot with them, to son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avraham, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in the lands of Canaan, and they had come as far as Haran, and they settled there. Okay, so this is the story, the beginning story of our ancestors. Abraham was born in Iraq, modern-day Iraq. And he was someone who was born into a very affluent family. Haran's father, Terach, was very, very wealthy. His wife's name, most of you may not be familiar with Avram's mother's name. Avram's mother's name was Amtalia, was her name. Amtalia was a very brilliant woman. Amtala in Aramaic means a logical argument. She was, according to the Midrashim, the person that helped educate Avraham. Midrashim say that when Avraham was when Terach and Amtalia found out that they were pregnant, at that same time Nimrod had made a decree that any child that was born will be set into the fire of Ur Kasdim. And Amtalia said to her husband, "No way, under no circumstances am I giving my son or my child to be offered as a sacrifice to this god of Molech. I'm not doing it." So she left and she gave birth by herself in a cave and raised Avraham, according to Midrashim, for 12 years outside of Ur. Which is why when we know the Midrashim tell us that Avraham comes back, he struggles with this idea of his father selling idols, his father selling Avodah Zarah, and he destroys them and so on and so forth. You're familiar with the story. Okay? But we know that, according to the Midrashim, that Haran died tragically. That ultimately, after Abraham has his father's idols destroyed in his workshop, he has him arrested. And there's a trial that happens where Nimrod has the whole family out on trial, and Haran is standing there, and they ask him, "Well, what do you believe in? Do you believe in the God of Abraham, or do you believe in all the gods?" And Haran is quiet, Midrash tells us, and eventually he makes a choice based on what happens to Abraham. Abraham is thrown into the fire, and he survives. Haran says, you know what, I'm going to say what my brother says. And he ends up dying. Haran ends up dying, tragic death. Okay? Haran represents someone, and this is important to understand a little bit of who Lot was. Haran represents mediocrity. Haran represents someone who doesn't know how to make up their mind. Haran represents someone who's stuck in the middle. The Maharal points out something fascinating. He says, if you look at Haran and his name, right, his name is made up of 3 letters, He, Resh, and Nun, right? So Maharal points out that each letter is a midway point in a specific set of numbers. He is 5, the midway point of the number 10 system, right? Resh is 200. The greatest number in Judaism is 400, right? As far as a letter, a font, right? And 200 is a midway point to 400. And Nun is 50, which is a midway point to 100. So the name Haran itself is an expression of in the middle, being stuck in the middle, being unable to make up his mind as to what it is that he believed in or what he's supposed to do. And interestingly, the Maharal points out that we see Haran's name come up again later in history. Anyone know? What happens if you add an aleph to the beginning of Haran? What do you have? Aharon. Aharon was the Kohen. What's the Kohen's job? The Kohen's job is to be the intermediary between the physical world and the spiritual world. Right? He's the guy that represents the middle, but he has a clear focus. The aleph represents his connection to the Almighty. Right? Aleph Haran. God who wants us to be centered. Haran was missing the aleph from his name. Okay, without that, you're just stuck. Being someone who is somewhat easy in nature, calm, does not get quick to anger, it sounds like an amazing trait to have. But all too often, people who have a pleasant predisposition often struggle with laziness. They often struggle with being stuck in the middle. They're not willing to go ahead and make passionate strides for greatness. And this is the challenge with a pleasant predisposition. The challenge with having a fiery personality is that all too often it can get you in trouble. But that fiery personality, if it's utilized the right way, can be a very potent ingredient for achieving excellence. So every trait in any extreme is bad. But ultimately what we want is to have traits that enable us to grow and become greater human beings. That's ultimately the message of the whole entire Torah. What can I do to become a greater, better human being? So, and therefore, when we're reading these psukim, and we're reading the stories of all of these figures that we're talking about, we ask ourselves, well, what are they supposed to be teaching us? What lesson did we learn from them? So Lot's father was killed, tragically. But he is the heir of his father, and therefore, maybe on some level, his father's philosophy. So the story continues, right? And we know that the story continues. God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'arzech mo'aticha, go for yourself from your land, your birthplace, and leave your father's house. And Lot ends up joining Abraham. As a matter of fact, Lot is the student of Abraham, the super student of Abraham. And some maybe even believe that he was the heir to Abraham, because we know that Abraham and Sarah could not have any children. They were barren. So Pasuk says, we're number 2 over here, Vayi riv ben ro'eh mikneh Abraham. There was a quarrel between the shepherds of Abraham and Abraham's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. Okay, there was this argument. They both had a lot of cattle. And the Midrashim tell us over here that the shepherds of Lot would not muzzle their sheep, and they would go ahead and eat from other people's lands. And Abraham felt that this was a mistake, a lacking in their care for other people and their property. And that was a midah, a trait that he was very concerned with. Why is he stealing? Why is my nephew why is he okay with these shepherds, his flock going ahead and eating from other people's property? He did not like this. He said, you know what? Maybe we got to go our own separate path over here. You go your way and I go my way. Where does Lot end up going? V'yiseh Lot et einav v'yirat kol kikar hayarden ki kula mashke lifnei shachat Hashem et Sodom et Amorah. He goes down to Sodom and Amorah. Why does he want to go down there? Well, he's got greener pastures down there. If you're standing up in Jerusalem and you're looking out into the plains of Jordan, the fields of Moab, they look beautiful, stunning down there. So he's going to go down there. There's some people that would say that part of what Lot was doing in Sodom was to do outreach, that he felt that, you know what, I'm going to go to a place which is so broken and so rotten and see if I can make a difference in that country, in that community. Right? And he goes down to Sodom, and ends up going to Sodom. Sodom is made up of five different cities, right? And Sodom and Gomorrah, and he goes down there. Okay? V'anshei Sodom ro'im chataim lef'a Hashem me'od. Right? And on the second page over there, right? And the people of Sodom are considered sinners and evil before God. And God says to Abraham, after he separates from Lot, don't worry about it. I'm going to make you into a great nation. Etnena ulazarecha ad olam. Look at the last verse. Ki et kol haaretz asher ata ro'eh lecha etnena ulazarecha ad olam. He separates from Lot, and now Abraham gets a blessing. Right? This is one of those famous psukim that reminds us that, no matter how awesome you are, if you're surrounded by people that are bringing you down, it blocks our ability to bring beracha into our lives. Yes, if you are surrounded, if you're doing everything right, but you're surrounded by people that are doing bad, it prevents you from being able to receive beracha into your life, into the world around you. And this is why we say it's so important to surround yourself with the right people, find yourself the right mentors, do whatever you can to be around the right kind of people, because that will allow that shefa of good that God wants to give all of us to come down. But if you're surrounding yourself by bad people, my mom always said, show me a person's friends and I'll tell you who the person is, right? So true, right? The people you surround yourself by often describe a little bit about who we are. And therefore, if you're able to surround yourself by scholars and thinkers and doers, that will have a tremendously profound impact on you and the people around you as well. Abraham separates from Lot, and now all of a sudden he's blessed, I will give you all the lands. Okay? Now, interestingly, all of a sudden they separate, he gets the blessing, and the Torah segues right away into this next story. Look at that, Genesis 14, 1 through 5. There is this famous battle of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. Right? Anytime we see something in the Torah come up first, this is the first time this ever happened. This is the first world war that ever took place in history. The first time that you had different nations fighting against each other. Up until now, all wars were internal, more like civil wars, inner battles that happened within communities. But now you had society reaching a point where they were willing and able to go out and break out of their countries and go on and conquer other people and rule over them. And that's what these psukim are happening. So now they separate. Lot goes away from Avram. Avram separates from Lot. And now all of a sudden, you have this war break out. These psukim go together. Not an accident. As a matter of fact, the rabbis tell us that there is a correlation between Abraham and separating from Lot and this particular war. And let's try to understand why. So there's something called, who was Vehi b'yimei Amraphel? In the days of Amraphel. Anyone know who Amraphel was? He had another name. His other name was Nimrod. Amar Pol, Amraphel. He's the guy that said to everyone, fall, throw them into the pit. Amraphel is also known as Nimrod. Nimrod was a interesting character. He's one of my most fascinating characters, actually. I love learning about Nimrod. Nimrod was he was a very bad guy. He was Nimrod's grandson's name was Paro, right? He was the most kings somehow are connected to Nimrod. Now, what makes Nimrod as an interesting character is that Nimrod was a warrior, and he was well known for being able to kill a specific kind of creature that the Midrashim speak about that is extinct. The Midrash tells us that there was this kind of an animal that used to live in the Levant area, which was half plant and half animal, and that it had like an umbilical cord into the earth. And it got its nutrients from the earth like a tree would, but the upper half of its body was more like an animal. And that it would have a certain radius that it would be able to attack its people, and if you were not aware, if you were walking into this layer of these kinds of creatures, it would come out and consume, it would destroy you, it would kill people. So people were afraid of venturing out of their villages because of these kinds of plants, whatever they were, hybrid plant creatures were outside, and Nimrod was an archer. And he understood archery very well, and he figured out that the way in which you kill these animals is not by going for the head, but going for the umbilical cord. And because he was able to sever these umbilical cords, he was able to go ahead and clear out the path, and he proclaimed himself to be king as a result of this ability, this unfound power. But people did not realize is what his real power came from the fact that he actually discovered Adam's cloak. Adam was given a special ketonet or, a special skins that God had given him, and one of the special blessings of these skins was that he had the power and dominion over animals. Right? This is all super midrashic sci-fi stuff. I apologize, but it's certainly fascinating and interesting, and it's part of our legend and our lore. I think you should know it. All right. Anyway, so Rafael is an interesting character. He's been around for quite some time, and he starts this war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. Now, typically, when you think 4 against 5, who has the upper hand? 5, right? But over here, the 4 kings defeat the 5 kings, and they enslave these other 5 nations, and they take over. Now, what's interesting is that the war comes to an abrupt end. Okay, they go down, and the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that this war takes place in the Jordan Valley, right? That they're in the Sodom area. Okay, and they conquer the names of the kings, and it goes through the names of the kings, and they serve them for 12 years. So now there's this war that's going on, and so on and so forth. Look at source number 4. V'ikhu et kol rechush Sodom v'Amorah. And these 4 kings seized all the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions. Right? They took everything. They also took Lot and the son of Avram's brother and his possessions and departed and settled in Sodom. Okay? So this is interesting. Why does the Torah got to tell us that Sodom was captured? That Lot was captured? Who cares? And why does the war come to an abrupt end with the capturing of Lot? It almost sounds as if Ki'ilu, right? The purpose of the war itself was to capture Lot. Right? Interesting. Why would they do that? What was he concerned with? What do they want with Lot? There's someone by the name of the Palit. We know the Palit's name was Og Melech HaBashan. He comes to Abraham. He had a crush on Sarah and was hoping that Abraham would go to war and would die in that war, and that he'd be able to go ahead and marry Sarah. So he comes and tells Abraham the news that his nephew was taken captive and that he's got to go ahead and do something. You got to go to war. Let's go to battle. Okay, so V'yishma Abraham on the bottom over there. I'm turning the page on the 3rd sheet. He hears what happens about his brother being captured, and he goes to war. Okay, he takes with him his 318 soldiers in pursuit as far as Dan. He has a small army, and he goes and he actually defeats the 4 kings and ends up freeing his nephew. Okay. So let's stop for a second. You have Nimrod, who hated Abraham. He hated Abraham because he hated the fact that Abraham was a monotheist. And monotheism was an assault to a king's reign and rule. If you're a polytheist, you could say the gods deem me as a king. I rule. So Abraham challenges Nimrod and says, no, you're not the ruler. There's only one ruler in the world. We don't bow down to men. We bow down to the one God. You're not the true king. Stop being such a narcissist and come down from your throne. Nimrod says no. But Nimrod wasn't too concerned about Abraham and his philosophy of monotheism. He laughed at it. You know why? Because Abraham has no heir. Abraham has no children. His wife and him were barren. As a matter of fact, they called him the barren mule. Right? You're like, he's a chamor. That concept comes from that fact that Abraham couldn't have kids. Just like mules cannot have children. You're a chamor. You're a donkey. You can't have kids. You're alone. You'll be alone your whole life. You'll die with your philosophy. But there was one threat that remained. You know what that threat was? Lot. Lot was a threat because Lot had adopted some of Abraham's beliefs, right? He was raised in Abraham's house. He was a student of Abraham and Sarah. So he understood that Lot posed a threat, but not the kind of threat that you think. There's something that Nimrod understood that most people did not understand. That the way in which you win the war of all wars, is you take out the most potent force that has the power of changing everything for humanity. And that was Mashiach. Because we know that Mashiach is hiding in Lot. We know that there's a certain spark of Kedusha that is buried in Lot. We know this only later and throughout time, because we know later on that Ruth comes out of Lot, a descendant of Lot, and his interaction with his daughters. And we'll try to see that insight together as well. Right? So Rafael or Nimrod understands this. He ends up capturing Lot and the war is over. Right? The whole purpose of this war was to destroy Abraham and his philosophy, and now that we have Lot, game over. We win. No Mashiach. No Mashiach for the Jewish people, no Mashiach for God. We could end the war right now. But we have to ask ourselves, why would God hide Mashiach in Lot? Why would you put the spark of the messianic power in someone like Lot? Lot's a complicated guy, right? Complicated guy, no question about it. But the story gets better, gets juicier. Okay, so this is all an introduction. Welcome to Romance and Royalty and Romance. Vayavo Shnei Malachim Sodoma. We know their angels come to destroy Sodom. Okay, finally Lot is freed. He's staying in Sodom. God tells Abraham he is going to have a child, his own child. Yitzchak will be born, and now these Malachim have to do three things to heal Abraham from the circumcision, to tell them the news of Sarah getting pregnant, and then the destruction of Sodom, and to save Lot himself. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol nihiyah bivaro. Thank God for water. Okay, so it says like this: Vayavo shnei malachim. Two messengers arrived in Sodom in the evening. This is important. Pay attention to the text itself, because the text is always trying to tell you something much more profound. I'm on page 3 right now, or source number 5. Okay, Genesis 19. Okay, this is the big chunk of our conversation for today. Hopefully, we walk away with some insight. Okay, the two messengers arrived in Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and he bowed with his face to the ground. So, first of all, what was Lot doing at the gates of Sodom? Okay, good. What's that? He was welcoming them. Some say he was also a judge. He had a position of power there. Now we have to ask ourselves another question: why was Sodom being destroyed? We know it was a bad country. We know that there was people there where the Sodomites were known for their cruelty. The story that the Midrash tells us that if you're a tall guy, they'd say, "Please come to our city. We'll give you a nice bed." And he's a tall guy in a small bed. Oh, the bed's too small for you. Too bad. We'll chop off your legs. Okay, boom. It's like crazy stories about Sodom. But there was one breaking point in Sodom that you do not see in the text itself, but it's worth mentioning. Lot has another daughter. Okay, the law in Sodom was that it was illegal to feed the poor. Illegal, against the law. They believed in something called the survival of the fittest. If you cannot survive on your own, you do not deserve any handouts. You should be taken out by nature. Nature does its thing. You don't deserve to live. This was Sodom. Very prosperous, wealthy, educated, city. Very wealthy, powerful people. But they came to the conclusion that if you can't make it on your own, you don't deserve to live. So that it was illegal to feed the poor in Sodom. Illegal to give tzedakah in Sodom. And this is one of the reasons why Lot goes there. He's trying to make a difference in this town. Okay? So what ends up happening is like this. Lot has a daughter, and she sees this poor chazik guy who's struggling. And she sneaks in the night, and she finds him, she gives him bread. And months go on, and the guy's still alive. And the people of the town don't understand how this poor guy's still alive. Must be someone's feeding him. Someone is taking care of him. This is illegal. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out who this perpetrator is, and we're going to have them arrested and killed. Turns out it was Lot's daughter. They capture her. They make her admit her crime. And the punishment was the most horrific punishment I've seen anywhere in Midrash. They strip her of her clothing. They take honey, and they cover her body in honey. And they take out these bees, and they break the hives right by her, and they end up stinging her to death. And Midrash says that God heard her cries. How do you have a people that takes an innocent young woman who's never married, who's just innocent, trying to help somebody, a simple, basic human desire to want to do chesed, to care for someone, and torture her to death for that in this most horrific way? And this was the evil that befell Sodom. Now, this is a horrific story. And the reason why it's so horrific is not just because of the torture of this young lady, it's because the story represents the antithesis of why God created the world. Why did God create the world? This is a question we all have to ask ourselves. Why, as Jews, what do we believe? Why did God do all this? Does he need the world? The answer is no. Does he need you to say amen? The answer is no. Does he need to hear your bracha? The answer is no. Why? What in earth does an infinite being, all-knowing, all-powerful, need you and me for? And the answer is he does not need us. But what God did was what we call an act of chesed. Olam chesed Hashem yibaneh. God created the world with the power of chesed. There's no need for it. Just to be clear, chesed is not tzedakah. Tzedakah is justice. Tzedek tishpot. Chesed comes from chasid, right? Chesed means doing something above and beyond, out of my responsibility. Justice, tzedek, is my responsibility. I have a chiyuv to give charity. I have an obligation to give charity. Let's say I gave all my charity. Some guy asks me for a dollar. I'm like, no, it's good. I'm good. I don't need to do. I did all my charity for the year. Thank you so much. Come next year, after Rosh Hashanah, right? But chesed is saying I did all my charity. Even though I did all my charity, I'm going above and beyond my responsibility. I'm going outside of my responsibility. That's called chesed. God's act of creating the world itself is an act of ultimate kindness. Abraham looks at the world and says, it doesn't make any sense as an infinite being. I see the world as perfect, fine-tuned universe. We are in perfect distance between the earth and the sun. Do you know if the earth was a half a mile closer to the sun, there would be no water? And if it was a half a mile further away from the sun, there'd be no water? It would be either a solid, it would be ice, or it would be a gas. That we are in perfect distance, that the rotation of the earth is perfect to allow life to evolve. That everything about this is fascinating. There's a mold. I forget the name of this particular kind of mold. Okay, and it moves around. It's like in Japan, they were trying to figure out the best way to arrange their train system. So what do? They made a model of Japan and all the different roads and pathways. Okay, and this mold understands how to it could solve mazes on its own. It's genius. Okay, so what they did was they took this mold and they put different grain. It looks for grain, like it looks for energy, right? And they put it in the key stations around the map. And what they wanted to see is how this fungus would spread through the map in the most efficient way from point A to point B, right? And this is how the Japanese rerouted all their trains based on this. It was the most perfect, most efficient line to get from point A to point B across their whole map. Isn't that genius? But that's not the genius. Isn't in the Japanese that understood how that this fungus could do this. But for me, the genius is how does the fungus know how to move from point A to point B in the most efficient way? Right? Genius. Right? There's wisdom that is baked into the earth itself. Abraham sees the genius of the world and says, Borei Olam, there must be a creator, must be a God in the universe. I don't believe in randomness. He rejects randomness. He rejects Was Rafael. He rejects all of it. Okay? And he comes to this conclusion that if God created the world, it must be through chesed, not justice. God's creation of the world is chesed, and therefore his avodah, his work, his whole life mission was to teach the world kindness. Stop being so cruel. Go above and beyond what you think justice is and open your hearts up to the potential of the world around us. Be more kind. That's all. That was his message. Abraham's message was open to chesed. Do what you can to make the world a better, greater place. That's what he wanted for humanity. And this was his lifelong message, and this was what Rafael was against, and so on and so forth. Sodom was the antithesis of this philosophy. And Lot is there. He's there. And now now these malachim want to destroy it. Okay, so now, look at number 2. And he said, please, my lords, this is Lot, talking to these malachim, turn aside to your servant's house. I'm in still number 5. Okay, Genesis 19:5, verse number 2. Turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet. Then you can go on your way early. Where does he learn this from? He learned this from Abraham. This is Abraham. This is the same thing. Abraham, you come to the house, we'll wash your feet, we'll give you some food. This is the chesed of Abraham. We're seeing Lot do it. It's beautiful. We're seeing the student carry out his teacher's lessons, right? No, we will spend the night in the square. But Lot understood that if you spend the night in the square in Sodom, you know what's going to happen? They're going to kill you, right? We don't take guests. You can't survive on your own. You're in trouble, right? You got to pay for a hotel. You can't afford it. You're in trouble. And even there, you got to be careful what hotel you stay in. But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered in his house. Okay, they came into the house. He's doing hachnasot orchim. He prepared a feast for them, and he baked unleavened bread. He's making matzah for them, and they ate. Right? They had not yet laid down, and when the town council and the militia of Sodom, right, insignificant and influential alike, everyone, the poorer people, the wealthier people heard what happened, right? The whole assembly, without exception, gathered about the house. When the townspeople heard that Lot took in these guests, because where are they? Where are these townspeople? We saw these strangers walk through our city. What are they doing here? Where do they go? Who is doing chesed in our community? We have to rip out the chesed gene from our community. So now you have a militia of people, literally with pitchforks, knives, outside of Lot's house. He's putting himself in danger by bringing in these people. Okay, so fine. So, and now they shouted to Lot and they said to him, quote, "Where are the ones who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may be intimate with them." They want to rape these men. Okay, we're talking about, not by women, we're talking about other men, right? So Lot went out to them, to the entrance. It's interesting, they respected Lot because he was part of the community. He was an elder of the community. They didn't go ahead and kill him. They said, listen, just give us these people. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. We see what's going on over here. We'll forgive you for this time, but we're going to kill, just give us these people. We want to do our thing with them. Mishkav Zachar, right? So Lot went out to them, to the entrance, and shut the door behind them. And he says to the people, "I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them what you want to do. But do not do anything to the others, since they have come under..." Such a weird thing. Right, turn the page. "Shelter under my roof. But they said, 'Stand back, the fellows,' they said. Right? 'Come here as an alien already and act as a ruler. You can't do this. You're nothing here. You're not a real resident. You're a foreigner. Now we will deal worse with you than with them.' And they pressed hard against that of the householder, against Lot, and they moved forward to break the door." Can you imagine the mob and the people screaming outside, "Give us these people." And what was Lot's offer? "We'll take my daughters." Is that normal? Like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with Lot offering his daughters? What? Yeah, it's definitely sick. But
it's a perversion of his sense of...
Excellent. It's a complete perversion of his chesed. You're so worried about these strangers, you're going to throw out your daughters to be raped by the mob? What's wrong with you? Are you sick? How does that happen?
But he didn't do anything with his first daughter.
He did not do anything with his?
To protect the first daughter.
He couldn't protect them at that point. That's midrash also, but he couldn't protect them. Let's hold that for a second. We're going to come back to that. That's a good point. Okay, number 12. "And the angel said to Lot, 'Whom else have you having your son-in-laws, your sons and daughters, or anyone else you have in the city? Bring them out of the place.' For this is the Malachim talking. And we are about to destroy the place because of the outcry against before Hashem has become great to God that he wants to destroy us. So Lot went out and spoke to the son-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, 'Up, let's get out of this place, because God is about to destroy the city.' But he seemed to his son-in-laws as one who jests," meaning the son-in-laws who saw Lot saying, "Come on, let's go." They're blowing up Sodom. They start laughing at him, like, "Listen, you're an old man. You're going crazy. Nothing's happening to Sodom." Yeah.
His daughters were not married.
He had other daughters,
He had some daughters.
right? So his son-in-laws said, "We're not leaving."
How many daughters did he
We don't know. I don't know how many kids he has, but he has lots of kids. What's that? We know of the 2 daughters that he offered the people that were not known to men. But if he had son-in-laws, must be he had other daughters that were married. But he had 2 single daughters that were not married, and he offered them as, Okay. So anyway, so as dawn broke, the messengers urged Lot on, saying, "Get up, take your wife, take the 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Still, he delayed. So the agent seized his hand, Malachim seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the 2 daughters that should not be there. In Hashem's mercy on him, do not throw out these sheets. Please give them back to me, because typically I'm very careful of not having God's name in the sheets. We don't throw them in the garbage. But if you want to give them back to me, I'll put them in I'll make sure they get disposed properly. And let them outside of the city. When they had brought them out to the outside, flee for your life, but do not look behind you. Don't stop anywhere in the plain of the fields, okay? Otherwise you're going to be swept away. But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my Lord, you have been so gracious to your servant and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills. Lest the disaster overtake me and I die." What is he saying over there? I understand. These guys just saved him. And now he's saying he doesn't want to go to the mountains. He's afraid of dying. Why is Lot being a chicken over here? Why isn't he saying, okay, whatever these Malachim say, let's just do that. Let's stick to the plan. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. I want to go someplace closer. It's a little place. Okay, and let my life be saved. He replied, very well, I will grant you your favor too. I'll not annihilate the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive here. Hence, the town being called Tsar. As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, God rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah and sulfur fire from God out of the heaven and annihilated those cities and the entire plain. All of Sodom is destroyed. Interestingly, if you like archaeology, they found a whole area in Sodom which was hit by meteorites containing sulfur. And it would date back to around the same time as this story took place. Okay, so how do we, we know this area was destroyed. We know that there were people living there. And we have huge salt deposits in that area. And there's two theories from where all the salt in the Yam HaMelech comes from. One is the basic natural explanation. We know that the Yam HaMelech is the lowest place on earth. And when all the water settles there, it has no place to go. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why we call it the Dead Sea is because someone who is dead cannot give to anyone else. Waters that are living, all waters on earth feed other bodies of water, except for the Dead Sea. That's why it's called dead. It can only take, can't give. If you're only taking, you're not giving, that's considered death. To be alive means to be able to give. The Dead Sea only receives. It's a pan that receives, all the water settles there. The water evaporates, leaves behind the salt. That's one idea. Now, another idea is that in addition to the fact that this is the lowest place on earth with the highest concentration of salt, there were these sulfuric meteor strikes that added to the sulfur in that area, enabling this place to become a place of tremendous amount of salt. We see them today. There are areas that have black stone of sulfur that can only come from meteorites in that area. So this pasuk over here describes something that we have evidence for today. Okay, the city was destroyed. The city is destroyed. Now Lot is free. Okay, I'm on number 26. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned to a pillar of salt. Why did she turn into a pillar of salt? What was her punishment? Why?
Salt.
What?
She was punished with salt.
Why was she punished with salt?
She sent to the neighbors to get salt for the cooking.
She would not want to feed the neighbor, the guests. She did not want to give them salt. Right? Now, salt has interesting properties. Right? On the one hand, salt preserves, and salt could also ruin. Right? You pour salt on the earth. If you have an empty farmland, you pour salt on it, you can't grow anything anymore. Right? But salt, we know, also has a power of preservation. Salt, if you break it down, you have sodium and nitrogen. Nitrogen and sodium on their own, right, are both poisonous. Right? But when you add them together, there's shalom between them, they become this life-giving force. You can't have life on planet Earth without salt. Everything has salt in it. So she's punished with salt because the life-giving force of salt, she does not want to share with people around her. She turns into a pillar of salt. She's punished. Forever lost somewhere in Sodom. There's some people that believe they know where this pillar of salt is. I've seen it. I have a hard time believing that it's really her. It just looks like a big rock that has a little bit of some curvy features to it, but I don't believe it's her. Okay, she's punished. She's punished. Okay, she's punished, and she dies. So all that remains now is Lot and his two daughters. Next morning, Avram hurried to the place where he stood, and he looks at Sodom and Gomorrah and all the plain, and he saw smoke, and he sees all the destruction. Imagine seeing the destruction of a whole entire city. Avram seeing this, and he's destroyed by it. I skipped the Pesukim where he's praying for their success. That God should not destroy. Thus, it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plains, annihilated the cities where God dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval. The only reason why Lot is saved is because of the chut of Abraham. Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his two daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his two daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all the world. Okay, come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." Okay, they realize, you know what? They're stuck in some valley. They don't see any people. They just saw a massive city being destroyed. From their perspective, all of humanity is wiped out. They're the only 3 people left on planet Earth. It's weird, but their initial desire was coming from a very noble place. Let's populate the earth. That's what we got to do. We got to do our thing. We're going to get our father drunk. We're not going to consult with him. Okay, and we're going to do what we got to do. Okay, so then that night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with the father, and he did not know when she laid down with him or when she rose. He was unaware of what happened, completely drunk. Okay, the next day, the older one said to the younger, see, I lay with the father last night, and let us make him drink again tonight. And you go and lay down with him, and we maintain life throughout our father. And that night, they also made their father drink wine, and the younger one went, turning the page now, and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down with him and rose. Thus, the two daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab, from my father. He is the father of the Moabites today. And the younger one also bore a son, and she called him Ben Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites today. Okay, so you have these two sons that are born from this relationship. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about this relationship that kind of came about from Lot and why it expressed itself in this unique way. Now, we know that the purpose and function of chesed is to do something profound. So, for example, I'll explain what I mean. There's a bird in the Torah called the chasidah, right? What chasidah is a stork, and we know that the stork is not kosher. And Rashi tells us the reason why the stork is not kosher is because it only does chesed with its own kind. Storks only care for storks, and that's a very selfish gene. And we don't want those genes. We believe that what we eat, you are what you eat, and therefore the things that you consume have an impact on your midot, and therefore we don't eat storks because they're cruel. They only do chesed with their own kind, which means that real chesed is when you do chesed with others. Real chesed is when you're not just mindful of yourself, but when you're mindful of other people. If you're only giving tzedakah to Sephardi causes, that's a problem, right? You have to be opening yourself up to other Jews and other people. I go out of my way when I take the train in. I make sure that, there's some guy who's collecting money on the train. I always make sure to give. I'm the only guy with a kippah ever giving charity to someone who's asking for handouts on the train. Not a lot, but a little bit, just because I think it's important that we have to be doing chesed with everybody. Okay, not only our own kind. As a matter of fact, if you think of it like this, incest itself was a super selfish way of thinking. I don't want to share my resources with other people, have my children marry each other, and now I'm keeping my family line intact. I have full control over their philosophy, their ideology, money, the real estate, all stays in my family. It looks great, right? It's all about control. It's all about selfishness, right? I don't want my kids to have to go marry outside. It's really difficult when if you have children that are married and you know that you're taking in your son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. It's never 100% with your philosophy and your outlook. You're always opening yourself up to new ideas coming into your home. And that's beautiful. But I could understand and see how it's so easy to say, well, I want exactly the same thing for my children and nothing else. Okay? So this incest is a perversion of chesed. Okay? Lot is supposed to be someone who's caring for the people of the world. And instead, his care leads him to a place where he's willing to go ahead and give his daughters away to the masses to be raped. How does that happen? It's a perversion in chesed. How many people here know people that are so involved in caring and giving to the world and they completely ignore their children? It's no difference to me. How many kids today I used to live in Israel. I lived in a small community with a lot of rabbis in the community. And most of the rabbis' children were not religious. These were Rosh Yeshiva, these were rabbis at big synagogues, amazing speakers. And I would learn with these kids, young kids, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And there was one common thread and theme that I met with all these guys. You know what that was? They all said the same thing to me. My dad never played ball with me. My dad never threw a ball. He never played any games with me. He's like, I remember vividly my father locked himself in a room for 3 days trying to figure out a Tosafot and how happy he was when he came out and he figured it out. And he was so ecstatic about that. He was like, but I just wanted to play ball with my dad. I wanted to play a game of chess with my dad. I just wanted to have a dad. I wasn't ready for that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, the halacha is that you can play ball with your kids on Shabbat. Most people don't know that. But when you become so crazed about what you think you're doing, you justify it, you become so righteous that that you're no longer able to impact your kids, you become somewhat perverted. And that Judaism is a perversion of Judaism. That's not the Judaism that God wants for us. Right? We say this all the time. Darchei Noam v'kol netivotea shalom. All of its pathways are peaceful. So when we see a Judaism that's expressing something that is broken, that's not Judaism. Lot was the heir to Abraham's chesed. Okay? He was the heir to this philosophy and this idea, but it was broken. He believed that by going to Sodom, he could change Sodom. But what ended up happening? Sodom ended up changing him. I had a meeting with Tzipora Heller. She's a famous speaker and a writer. Genius. She's one of the few women I know that has finished Shas and knows it cold. And, she finished all of Talmud. She's a Talmudic scholar. No, that's not true. A woman could do that. And anyway, so she ends up, I had a meeting with her. My wife and I had a meeting with her. We were talking about raising our children and, our guests and so on and so forth. We have lots of different kinds of people in our home all the time, all kinds of people, colorful personalities, and so on and so forth. So we were speaking about what could we do to protect our children. Our kids are getting older, they're more influenced now, what do we do? So her position was as follows. She said to us, I'll never forget this, she said, if you want to make your bedroom a sanctuary for pigeons, don't complain if you smell like bird duty. Complain if you smell like bird poop, okay, right? So, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna be impacted. There's gonna be a residue of that kind of stuff, right? And I said it's worth it, right? If I don't care, ultimately, because if you show your kids that that life is about sacrificing sometimes for the klal, as long as you're not sacrificing them to the klal, you're okay. As long as I'm not sacrificing my children to the community, but my children see my sacrifice for the community, I'm okay with them smelling bad. And I'm okay. And if you've ever met my kids, thank God, I did pretty good. Thank God. Right? I did pretty good. So Lot puts himself into an environment which ends up corrupts him, to the point where his whole concept of chesed is completely perverted. Typically, chesed starts in the home, and then it goes outward. Right? As a matter of fact, we say something called Aniyeh Yercha Kodem. If you have a responsibility to give charity, where do you start first? Home. And then your community, your synagogue, and then in your city, then your state, and then in the neighboring states, and the neighboring countries, and so on and so forth. That is how we perform our kindness. We look inward, and then we go outward. But if your kindness is only outward, and there's no inward, you end up destroying the very nature. You end up leading to a place of this selfish, narcissistic situation where two daughters find it justified to go ahead and to drug their father to have children from them. And by the way, the Midrashim say that Lot was fully aware of what was going on.
Yeah.
He was fully aware of what was going on. Right? He allowed his daughters to take advantage of him. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes and I'll finish up, and then I'll take all your questions and so on and so forth. So let's go like this. So here you have a very different approach to relationships. Lot and his daughters, have we didn't see the same passion that we saw with Yehudah, Boaz, and David. Here there's something corrupt, There was something clearly interesting over there. We spoke about having virtue, right, with your passion. Virtue and passion together has this awesome product, that God created a world that we're supposed to create passion in our lives. We're supposed to lead a life that draws us to excellence, and that all too often that even sexual passions can be used for a profound power of creating good in the world. But when it's untethered and it's not focused on something that is just and true, it can be very dangerous. When it's just about your narcissistic wants and desires, it's very, very dangerous. But in all the cases that we saw with Yehudah and his line, these were cases of people that definitely had passion and made mistakes. And the one redeeming factor they all had was that they were able to recognize that they made the mistakes. They had no problem admitting their mistakes, including David admitted his mistakes. Yehudah admitted his mistake. Boaz is less clear over there what happened over there, but we know that ultimately they were driven by rash thinking first. They were swept away by their passion, and then they would no longer allow the passion to justify their actions, They let themselves swoop into a place of cerebral kind of thinking. Was this the right thing? Was it right or wrong? I made a mistake. If I don't recognize my ability to make mistakes, I can't do teshuvah. I can't be better. Teshuvah is the most important thing that defines us as human beings. So we have the power of recognizing our flaws, the power of recognizing the evil that we can make into the world, but we could look back, learn from it, and grow as individuals. I am not stuck in a path. My choices from yesterday do not define who I am right now, nor into the future. But Lot was a little different. Lot's daughters chose names that will forever remind us of their acts. There was no busha there, no regret there, no second thinking about what they did. They were completely justified in their actions. They've taken some of the things that they saw in Sodom and they brought those ideas into their world. Now it's interesting. When you have a perversion of chesed, you know what ends up happening? You always have sexual immorality.
Sexual what?
Immorality. Right? Sexual immorality. Where do we see this? We see this later with Moab, right? We saw this not too long ago, a few weeks ago. Balak realizes he can't curse the Jewish people. Balak and Bilam end up sending their daughters, this children of Lot and of Lot's daughters, the descendants, right? What do? They come out to the people, right? And we're going to go ahead and entice you sexually. We're going to entice you with all kinds of things, right? Chesed gone wrong. We want to do what's right. We want to protect ourselves. We want to care for our kingdom, but we're going to give you our daughters in the same way that Lot gave his daughters, right? It's complete perversion. When the Jewish people came into the land of Israel, it wasn't just we're conquering the land. We weren't there going ahead and chopping people's heads off for the sake of chopping people's heads off, right? There was a peace treaty that we had to offer peace first. These are our terms. These are our philosophies. These are our core values. If you're willing to accept our core values and our terms, we make peace right now, and we're good. You don't have to fight. But when we live in a world of immorality, our responsibility is to fight against that immorality. And the Jewish people, what we brought to the world was the sense of morality. It's complicated. There are some dark periods in our history, no question about it. But ultimately, what's that?
I was just going to say, so why is Mashiach coming through this?
Good question. We're not going to be able to answer today, but we're getting closer to the answer. We're getting closer to the answer. Okay? So ultimately, here you have a situation where you have this complete destruction of chesed leading to sexual immorality. You have a family that's supposed to go ahead and carry out the philosophy of Abraham, but it's lost. It's lost because of who they surround themselves with. It's lost because of the ideology is not being refined anymore, to the point where they're willing to give away their daughters. This is the story of Lot and his daughters. Why does Mashiach come from this? Right? Yeah.
You try to make Lot a likable character until he goes to live in Sodom. But there's the other story that he wasn't so nice with the shepherds, with the people that guarded his flocks in Abraham, and they were fighting all the time. So if he was a man of chesed, that discord between the shepherds, the workers of Abraham and Lot, should never have happened. So there was already something wrong there.
Right.
And for him to choose a bad place with a young family or filled with girls, he's not, for me, he's not a man of chesed. But his daughters that followed him in the end had an existential moment, right? And they did something, right? For an existential line. If you're starving to death, you can eat chaza, right?
Right.
If they think they're the end, they did something, maybe they knew it wasn't the right thing, but they did something to preserve what they thought would be the only human line.
When you're so narcissistic.
They didn't commit they did it was almost as if a necessity for them. It wasn't out of desire. It was out of...
They were so narcissistic that they were unwilling to look outside of the world that they were in for other people. You become so narrow, so myopic, so narrow-minded that it was only about them. God, I just want to end this, and I'll take all your questions, just for the people that are listening over here. The point that I want to leave up is like this. You see this dark nature in the line of the messianic line, okay, on both sides, father and mother, okay? You see chesed being perverted, leading to sexual morality. On the other hand, you see David, you see the passion unbridled passion, leading to making poor choices, but his ability to go ahead and do teshuvah. Why, we haven't answered why these two things lend itself to the Messianic era. And what we're going to do as Rad Hashem next week is we're going to try to start answering the question. What is the era? What are we actually what are we asking for when we want Mashiach? What is the goal? Maybe if we understand the goal, when we look back at the stories, we'll have more clarity as to why this had to evolve in the way that it did. Thank you so much for listening, but I'll take your questions right now.